the next section, I talked about what I call an unexpected journey. And I cannot do the stories justice in the few minutes that I have left to talk at all. You would have to just go ahead and get my dissertation and just read it cover to cover to really understand how exciting and interesting their stories were. They were interesting. We laughed a lot. Naeem and I laughed a lot. Samantha cried during hers, and it was really heartbreaking. I had to, because I'm a crier, I had to kind of pull back in the interview and try to be professional and not cry with her. But just to kind of go through really quickly, for Delia Rose, she said this is hard for too many reasons. She was in the middle of her doctoral program and she decided to leave because she left from the South and went up north and she was all alone, the only African American woman in her program completely. There was no one that looked like her, and the word she used to describe it is just cold. She said the weather was cold and the people were cold, and she just got tired of that. And after she finished her qualifying exam, she decided to leave. She wasn't going to continue, and that's kind of heartbreaking to hear for someone to make it so far and decide to leave, not because she wanted to, because she felt like she just wasn't welcome there. She was just tired of continuing to fight with these cold people. So she wanted to come back to the South where it was warm. Not just warm physically, but also warmer people. So she decided to teach for a little while. But when I interviewed her, she had decided to go back, and she's like, I'm not a quitter. I'm extremely persistent. I don't quit. And so she had decided to go back and finish. For Dr. Samantha Johnson, she said that this is a long, hard journey. She had a similar experience. She was in the South. She was getting her PhD at a predominantly white institution, and she completely felt alone, same thing. It was just hard for her. She got to a point where she talked about being in her apartment, lights off, just completely in the dark, crying. And one of her mentors called her. She was over a program that was there in place to help people of color succeed, and she came over and she told her, you're not going to quit, because she had decided that she was going to quit as well. And she told her, you're not going to quit. So that's an important point to make, is that support was extremely important for all of these women. At the times they were at their lowest and felt like they couldn't make it, there was someone there to help them to continue. And so for her, it was Shayla. Shayla came over, talked to her, and told her, you're not going to quit. And when she talked about her degree, she said that I owe my degree to God and Shayla, because I would not have been able to do it without them. For Dr. Skylar Dawson, she said there's no substitute for hard work, and that came across over and over again when she talked about her interview. She believed in working hard and being the best. And for all of the women they talked about, because they were the only African American woman, they felt this pressure and this burden to make sure that they were the best at all times. No one told them you had to be the best and make sure your work is at the top. But they felt like they had to work harder, be smarter, and they had to make sure they showed that at all times. They could not let us down. They could not let African Americans down, because they were representing all of us. And so for Dr. Cynthia Naima Anderson, I called her a serious scientist, because that's what she said. Those were her words. She said, I'm a serious scientist, and she believed in doing quality work. She had some struggles herself when she went off to school. She went up north as well. And she did talk about, just like Delia did about it being cold, that affected her. She actually remembers being depressed. She called it seasonal depression because of the weather. But she was able to succeed, and because of the support that she had. She really talked about how beneficial it was. Her sister or her best friend would jump in the car and drive 12 hours to come see her when they felt like there was something wrong. And then Dr. Grace Williams, she said, I gave it my best. She is the full professor that I had in my study, so she's more at the end of her career. And she really just talked about how throughout her career, she has always made sure to give it her best, and that's been extremely important. So when I looked across all of the stories that I had, I put together storylines of cooperation and storylines of tension. So the storylines of cooperation is stories and experiences that really went with who they are and contribute to who they are as scientists, for their passion for science. It helped to deepen that. So having an influential teacher. Another one would be the impact of illness. For Delia and for Samantha, one of the reasons they want to study science is because of the impact of illness. For Samantha, it was her aunt. Her aunt had lupus, and she was there when her aunt first had a seizure, and then for diagnosis and doctor's visits. So that really connected her. She just knew when she got her PhD she wanted to study lupus, and that was in her mind. For Delia, it was HIV. Unfortunately, her mother had died when she was 2. She had been diagnosed right before she was born, so that was her focus. She wanted to make sure that she studied HIV, and she actually did when she was working on her PhD. Another important part was mentoring and support. Definitely at the HBCU, for all of the women being in that environment that was so supportive and encouraging was really important to them. And Samantha even said she tells any student that she meets that she would want them to attend the HBCU if they could, because it was such an important part of her experience. Also, undergraduate research, I talked about that a little bit. Some of them were also research and training programs like MARC or MBRS, and they talked about how those programs were extremely supportive and helped them to get in. And just having support and recognition, having someone tell you that you're smart and you're doing a good job of encouraging you was extremely important. And then there were some storylines of tension when the women had to deal with sexism and racism. Samantha talked about working on a project with other African American students, and there was a white student who went and talked to her mentor and said, I want to work with them. Can I work with them on that project? And he was like, you don't want to do that. He was like, that what the black kids are doing? You don't want to work with them. He didn't believe in what they were doing. Your mentor is supposed to be your advocate for success. And he was really degrading and downgrading what they were doing. So that was an important moment for her. As far as feeling insecure, invisible, and alone, just being in environments where you're the only one and you're alone, there was some insecurity that they felt. And they used the term imposter syndrome. And basically imposter syndrome is feeling like I'm not supposed to be here. So going into an environment and you're feeling like they're going to find out at any minute that I'm not smart enough and I'm not good enough to be here. So with that mental weight in the back of your mind, it affects how successful you're able to become. And so some of the overwhelming burdens was being the only African American. And then as the women got older and had families and children, that was another overwhelming burden. It was a lot. It created tension between them being able to be the scientists that they wanted to be, but also having to leave at 5 o'clock because daycare closed, or even having to being able to do the research they wanted to do because they were pregnant and had to take time off. So that really created tension for them. And so the last section that I did was Lift as We Climb. I talked about how all the women, without exception, all the women were very committed to making sure they supported others. They did it without being asked. They just, when they talked about their story, they talked about, I am committed, fully committed to making sure that those around me and those coming behind me are successful as well. So I called that section Lift as We Climb. And then the last section was Dear Little Black Girl. One of the final questions that I asked them was, one of the final questions that I asked them was if you had to give advice to a black girl that's interested in science, what would you say? Because for me, it's important as well to make sure that any African American woman that wants to pursue science is able to do so. And so this is my final section. I'm just going to give you little snippets of that. And so I dedicated the letters to my little black girls in the back of the room. And I want them to be able to pursue science if they so choose. So just a little bit of what Dr. Skylar Dawson-Bennett says is she was like, never lose your curiosity, be a keen observer, be a critical thinker, and most importantly, be persistent and courageous in all that you do. I know I don't have to worry about you being a successful scientist because I believe in you, but I believe you are already well on your way. And the next one was for Jemiah. Basically what Delia Rose was said, what she remembers her mother used to say when she would complain about doing something, it's only going to take you a minute. She was like, don't get caught up and worried about what you need to do. Just go ahead and do what you need to do and you'll be successful. So she said she tells herself every day, it's fine. She said she tells herself every day, it's not going to take but a minute. Go ahead and do it. And I said, Dear Jada, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. I was afraid to leave home because Samantha Johnson talked about when she got the opportunity to leave home, she didn't do it. And so she wanted to say, make sure that whenever you have the opportunity that you take it. Don't be afraid for a second that you're ever alone. And she said she owed her PhD to several people and definitely to God, so she wanted to make sure that she gave the message of having strong faith. And then, Dear Jaya, my mother used to have this saying, allow yourself to think. I'm passing this advice on to you. Work hard, be smart, use your head, and make sure you never stop allowing yourself to think. And then Simure, at times the road can be very difficult, but make sure you don't let the harshness that comes as a result of being a competitive scientist atmosphere deter you or affect your self-worth. Know that you can do it. You're intelligent, you're passionate about science, and you can be successful. And so from my study, the implications were, and the implications are like the so what. All right, so you told all of these stories, so you know all of this stuff. but what do we do with it? And so one of the things I wanted to pull out of it was to say that we need to make sure that we sustain and enhance the systems of support. We have some really strong systems of support, and we need to make sure that we enhance those. So those enrichment programs that we have, the women talked about how important they were, MARC and MBRS, and make sure that we're present in them. Not just to have them in place, but make sure that we're present. And then also, I believe we need to reform our hiring, recruitment, and retention practices. The fact that women felt impeded by the tenure fly. Basically, the tenure fly can say you have a certain amount of time to be promoted and do so much work. And if you have a baby or need to take time off, you don't get to stop your clock. And that should not be in place if we're thinking about really being progressive. And unfortunately, the pay is not equal. You could have women doing the same thing as a man, and unfortunately, they're not going to be paid the same thing, and that's something that really needs to change. And then the final part was challenging the oppressive structures. The structures are in place, and they're creating barriers. For the women that we talked about that have been able to succeed, there are more women who have not, and that's unfortunate. And so one of the things that could help is teaching them how to understand the system. Naima talked about how her mother told her to go into a situation not talking, but listen and pay attention so that you know how they speak, how they interact, and so that you can do that as well. And I called that la facultad. That's understanding and responding to the systems that are in place. And so when I was finishing my research, I was actually pretty much in the middle of it. I was working over at the library of UNCG. And I came across this quote. It was right around when I was reading Samantha's story, and it really just stuck with me. And it says, imagine what you can become when you can be who you are. It stuck with me because I felt like, just imagine what these women could have become, or any woman who wants to be a scientist, just imagine what they can become if we're able to put in place a structure where they can succeed despite the barriers. Thank you. Looking up to my analysis before I cry anymore. Really quickly, I can't continue without thanking a couple of people. Definitely my advisor, Heidi. I won't say anything more because I'll cry. To my committee, I called in my dream team, Heidi, Dr. Tan, Dr. Cooper, and Dr. Graham. I messed up. Okay. And then my editing staff, I call them my staff, but they're really just my closest friends who are willing to edit whenever I ask them to. Adrienne, my sister, and Angela White, who's not here. My family, the Jameses. Thank y'all for coming. My Bennett Bells and my Aggies. Thank you all. And then the Pettys all across the back. Thank you all to my family. I wouldn't be here without them. And last but not least, my MVP. Sometimes people ask me, I've been asked over these 7 years, y'all didn't know it's been 7 years, right? Okay. So I've been asked, how have you been able to do it, working full time and 4 children? And I would not be standing here at this moment if it had not been for my husband. So thank you. This concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.